Hello, Kansas and Western fans. It's time for another episode of Viewer Questions, and this is where those of you who've had some questions that you'd like to ask have done so. I've already responded, I believe, to all of these to the individual posters, but a lot of these questions I feel like are interesting to be addressed to all of you for a video because I think a lot of it is good information in general, just in terms of how I handle things or how things have been done on this layout. So that's what we're going to go over today. I've got 6 questions, and this first one comes from Crooked River and Eastern Railroad, and he asks, have you insured your collection? If so, what, who, how did you go about doing it? And that's a great question for all of us who have collections of any kind, whether it's model trains or toy cars or stamps or anything, is if you ever lose that thing, that's worth a lot of money, or could be at least, and you're just going to be out financially. So that's something that you might want to consider. And, I don't know if it matters to anybody how much their collection might be worth, whether it's a huge amount, 5-6 figures, or a small amount, a few $100s, but it's still something you might want to consider. So how I handled it was I just talked to my insurance agent that I have my home insurance through and told them that I had a pretty significant collection, and kind of asked their opinion. And we're going to shift the camera here while this train goes by. So I called my insurance agent and asked them what they thought about it. And we went over basically our figures for our home insurance. And if you do or don't have home insurance, you may or may not know that you insure the reconstruction of your home, but you also insure the contents, right? So if your house completely burns down or gets blown away by a tornado, there's all that stuff that you have that you no longer have or is ruined or whatever. And so you're going to need to replace that too. Furniture, clothes, cooking utensils, all that stuff. And so there's an amount of money that goes for that purpose. And I can't remember what the actual terminology is for it. I'm going to just call it personal property allowance. But there's a figure that's attached with your insurance. And so you kind of have to figure out what is that going to need to cover? How much stuff do I own that I'm going to need to replace? And so we talked about that figure for my own insurance, and I'm not going to go over that for obvious personal financial reasons, but we kind of decided that that was going to be enough to cover the value of my layout. Because we don't really own a whole lot of other stuff. We have kind of a plain, boring house, I guess you might say, without going into too much detail. But let me just pause this real quick here. But I kind of decided that given the amount of things that I own for the layout, rail cars, locomotives, electrical things, structures, and all that personal property allowance would be more than enough to cover that. Now, obviously, it wouldn't cover the reconstruction cost. It wouldn't be enough to cover the reconstruction cost or anything like that. You're just out that, obviously. But then you kind of get the joy of building a whole new railroad. So anyway, that's kind of how I handled it. This is going to be something that everybody's going to have to examine on their own to figure out how they want to handle it. But that's kind of how I did it. I know that there are policies that you can write, and that's kind of how I approached it originally was, am I going to need to write a separate policy just for my layout? And after discussing that with my insurance agent, we kind of decided that just wasn't going to be necessary. So everybody's going to have to do their own thing in that regard, but it is something that everybody should consider. Now, one thing I do want to add to that is my agent did recommend that I have some kind of valuation in mind for my layout. So this is a collection of all the boxes for my locomotives and some of my more expensive cars, I guess you might say. So I've kind of recorded that. I have created a list of all my rail cars that I have in my collection. So I've kind of done that. But honestly, I kind of feel like all of my layout videos will be helpful in that regard too, because obviously my layout is tied to my house. I've got lots of pictures of this room. You can certainly refer to the video to see what kind of structure kits that I have and things of that nature. So I do have documented evidence of my collection. So that's another detail that my agent did bring up, was you're going to want to value your collection to make sure, and also provide evidence when they cut you that big check to start replacing things, that you actually had what you had. So I guess that's one final note for that question. All right, moving on to the next question. This one is from QNE Railroad, and he actually commented and questioned, I see you are using the new Walthers turnouts here. I'd be curious to hear your experience after operating with them for a while, especially when pushing cars through the reverse position. I have a couple of their turnouts that like to derail my cars. I think it has something to do with the very long unsupported closure rails, but it may also be because I have curved switch ladders, which are turnouts connected to the with turnouts connected to the reverse positions, and perhaps the wheels don't have time to straighten out before hitting the next points. Okay, so there's several points to mention here, but first of all, I will say that my entire layout was microengineering until they just ran out of stock. And that was because they were in the midst of moving their production from their old location to their new location, and so they just weren't making any new inventory. And so all of my turnouts up to this area here on my layout were all microengineering. So from this area on, for the upper level of my layout, I switched to Walthers. And I made that decision because even though I've heard lots of great things about Pico turnouts, I think their rail tie, or their ties are just a little bit too wide. And I think they kind of stand out in that way. And I was trying to go for realism, and I thought Walthers was the next best choice, I guess. Right or wrong, that's something that everybody can debate to their own leisure, but that's what I ended up doing. So we have here some examples of Walthers turnouts, and you can see the closure rails, how they're just long, thin strips of steel or whatever they use for material, and there's not even any, I guess, base, foot, whatever the rail cross-section is called, where you can see it ends right at this point, where on this side here, you can see that the rail has a base to it, and then right here, you can see on the closure rails, there is none. And so what that does is it leads to a little bit of springiness, flexibility, I guess you could say. And you can kind of see there how it kind of is easy to move. And I think that's what he's talking about, is with any real weight involved, depending on how the position is switched, pushing weight into this rail or into the closure rails can make them spring a little bit and widen out, and then your cars will derail. So my personal experience is I've not experienced that. I know it's a thing. I've heard other people complain about it. I would say that all of my turnouts are low speed turnouts, and I'm sure that might have something to do with it. But if he's using those in a rail yard, then I'm sure those would be low speed as well. I only have one curved turnout. It's also Walthers, and you can see here where we're talking about there's no base to the rail, and you can see right where the spikes end, how you have such a long unsupported rail this entire length of this curve. And I think that's what his issue really is he's got several of these, which means that's even more possibility of the rail itself springing back and forth. And I don't know what the resolution is to that. That's the design that they chose to go with. Obviously, if they've been selling these things for a while, it might be, one-off bad production, or I couldn't say. And I don't know if they've addressed this themselves, if they will send you a new turnout, I couldn't say. But all I can say is I have not had that experience with mine. But, my layout's pretty young, so I don't know how long he's been operating his, if that's something that works, ends up getting worse as they get used. As more and more cars go through these and start to spring that a little bit more, I couldn't say, but hopefully things get better. I don't know what to say about that, but I just haven't experienced that. So hopefully that answers his question. All right, question 3 comes from Stefan Hessens 6970, and he asks, relating to the Union tank car yard, would it not make more sense to switch both turnouts and the crossovers in pairs in the yard? It would prevent shorts, derailments, and possible collisions, or would that compromise certain operations? So what he's referring to is a crossover, and specifically here in the Union Tank Car Company yard, and that's what we have here. And this is a crossover where you see two turnouts that face each other, and the track literally crosses over from one track to the other. And so what he's asking is, and I'm guessing he asked this question after my operations video recently where I showed how I operate in this yard. He asks, if you switch one, which that one is the diverging route now, wouldn't it make sense to always switch the other? Because you have to have them both switched for the cars to make the full crossover. And the answer would be totally, definitely, it would make sense. However, none of my turnouts on my on my display portion of my layout, I guess, are automatic. They're all manual. So basically what I have to remember to do every time is if I'm going to switch one, I have to switch the other, or as he said, it could create shorts or collisions or anything else. Now I did build the turnouts on my staging level to match that because they are automatic. So one switch, and I'll just move over there really quick and show you. So this is the switch panel, I guess, for my staging yard, which is underneath there, you can see. And it's a double-ended yard, as you can see in the diagram. So you have a turnout at one end here, and then on the other end of the track, you have another turnout here. And with one switch, and that's what these switches are here, placed right on where the track is, one switch does throw both turnouts at both ends to ensure, again, like he mentioned, that we don't have any shorts or collisions or derailments. So I did that in the staging yard because, as you can see, it's difficult to see, difficult to reach, and all of that. I do plan to have cameras down there at some point, but it'd be very difficult to make sure that both turnouts are thrown, so I wired it that way. But on my display levels, I guess you would call them, I prefer to operate everything manually, just for more involvement, I guess, direct involvement in how the railroad runs. So to his point, I just have to remember to switch those at both ends. And that siding here in the Royal Gorge route is an example. All right, question 4 comes from Three Bridges MR, and he asks, with such a large layout on multiple levels, how did you organize the DCC power? I see large layout builds in the framework stage that seem to buy a lot of Digitrax units and extra power boosters, but they don't seem to have a clear plan for how they will join them all up. As you are past that stage, I wondered how you tackled the power requirements. Okay, so first of all, just for general information, I use NCE. I've used this for probably 20 years now, and so I'm just used to it. When I built this most recent layout, I decided to stick with it because it's what I knew. So I started out with a power cab and the initial setup that it comes with, and it basically comes with your controller here, your cab, and one of these panels, and you wire that up directly to the track from that panel, and you're ready to go. You've got DCC power, very simple. So obviously this layout is much too large to be run on a simple power cab, except, wait a minute, it wasn't. I was able to run my entire layout on a single power cab. Now that answer is a little bit misleading because I have lots of locomotives. I think I have 20 some locomotives, and there is no way I could run all 20 locomotives off a single power cab. But the interesting thing, which I did not know till I tried it, was the 2 amps that this power cab can provide was enough to reach the entire layout. So I could run a locomotive on any level, any stretch on the single power cab. Where I ran into trouble was when I had multiple operators trying to run trains at the same time. And a lot of my locomotive consists are 2-engine consists, as you can see down here. But and each locomotive pulls about 2 amp or a half an amp, I believe. So once you start running more than 4 locomotives at the same time, you start to experience sound drop-off, power interruptions, and so on, because you've reached the max of what that power cab can do. So I knew that was going to be an issue early on. I wanted to see what would happen before I went into any expense, and that's how I learned that, was just experience. So what I ended up doing was I ended up buying a power booster, and that's what that looks like there. This adds another 5 amps of power to the entire system, and just doing the math and figuring out how many locomotives I was going to run on this layout at the same time, I decided that 5 amps was going to be enough for now, at least. Because if you do the math, 5 amps plus The 2 amps, I believe, that you can add for the power cab gives you 7 total. And so that's 14 locomotives running at the same time. And I don't really see a need for that. My layout isn't that big unless I start to run huge consists, and there's no need to do that because my trains aren't going to be that long. So that discusses the power requirements. Now, in terms of layout, I've never held a layout complete that was this large. So what I did was I started buying UTP panels, and those are these things here, and I spread them out throughout the layout. With those panels comes these cables, and I can't remember what kind of cable it is exactly. It's basically like a phone cable, but they come in I think 6-foot and 12-foot increments. And so just for efficiency's concern, I decided to buy a bunch of 12-foot cables to tie them together. And so I just started to spread these UTP panels out, basically the length of a cable. And again, that was just for efficiency's sake. Now, I have learned that the spacing is a little bit too far in some situations. And you can see how far out I've spread these things. There we go. So this is just this side of the layout. So I have several of these smaller cabs. I think they're called cab 6s or something like that. That you can unplug and plug in any of these UTP panels. So as your engine moves along the layout, you can just remove your cab and plug into the nearest panel. But what I've learned so far in this layout is with the size of my rail yard, these, I guess these springy cords, whatever you want to call these, they do run out of length a little bit. So I'm just going to pull this out and show you how far I can get away with stretching these out. So plugged it in there. There's some pretty good tension on it. That's about as far as you can go, and I would say that's probably about 5 feet. So I have run into a condition where I probably need to add some more of those panels, but all I did was daisy chain those around the entire layout. Now, I did leave them all along the lower level, thinking that there was no need to add them to the upper level, and I've been right so far. I know when I was building the layout, I received several comments about people suggesting that I switch to radio control, and that's a possibility in the future, but for now, these have been working for the most part. So I hope that answers the question. I guess that's not much of a plan, I guess you might say. I just kind of used the limits of the length of cable and daisy chaining them around the layout, but it's worked for me so far. All right, question number 5 comes from Derek Alexander, 4030, and he asked, what color paint did you use for the tower at the refinery? And I believe he was referring to this tower. You can see that kind of chrome color. Just to answer the question really quick, I went with this Rust-Oleum full-size paint can, and it's called an aluminum metallic. And I use a lot of these if I can, because it obviously saves a lot of money. I mean, you've got this standard kind of commercial brand of spray paint versus, let's see if I can grab one here. Okay, versus these Tamiya smaller spray paint cans. And if you've never bought these, they're very good paints for sure. Good coverage, good dry time, all that. But they're about a third the size of a full can, maybe a quarter, I'm not sure. And they also don't seem to hold very much paint. These do not last long. I've moved away from using them, although I still have quite the collection, just because of the expense. These small cans cost about the same as those large cans. And you might ask, well, why don't you just use airbrushes all the time? And that's an easy answer. That's because I'm lazy. I do plan to use airbrushes or an airbrush at some point, but I plan to use that for smaller applications like weathering and so on. So far for assembling kits like this, I've been able to get away with using these paint cans. It just works. It's a lot quicker. It's just a lot quicker. There's no cleanup involved, and I have a paint booth, so these have worked for me. And I've got this flat gray primer also out here because that's what I've been using for all the superstructure. So now you know where that comes from. All right, our last question for today comes from Airwolf Crazy, and he asks, where did you get the conifers along the Royal Gorge route? And he's referring to these, and these look very good. I think they blend in very well with the backdrop. I do need to do some paint coloring to those, some weathering, vary the color on them a little bit, but these are all ready-made trees available right out of the package. This is what they look like. And here is where I got them. Here's what they are. These come from Hobby Lobby. This is kind of like their store brand, I guess. It doesn't really have a brand name on it. I guess it's JTT Scenery Products. And these might be available other places. Hobby Lobby is close to me, and so is Hobby Town, so that's where I get most of my stuff. And that's all these are. They're called Evergreen Tree, 12-piece. There's the product number. They come with bases on them, but they're easily removable. And the interesting thing about them, here, let me just pull one out really quick. So you see in the package that base, and it looks like it's part of the tree itself, but all it is a plastic base. When you pull the base off, it's actually a steel rod that the thing is made out of. So I know there's methods of making trees out of pipe cleaner brushes and things like that. That might be what this is, I'm not sure, but I've just taken the base off, drilled a hole, and have stuck them right into the foam scenery like that. So very easy to use. You can see the price is $7.99, and you get, it's 12 pieces right there it is. So been using a lot of these. I think Woodland Scenics has a very similar product, just under a different brand name, but hopefully that answers your question. So I guess that's it for now. Quite a bit covered today. I think this video is plenty long enough. So if anybody else has any questions or definitely any comments related to these questions, I definitely don't know it all. These videos are more just to share what I've done for my layout. Definitely not trying to say that that's the best way. So if you guys have any comments in that regard, please share them. We're all trying to learn here. But otherwise, I'm collecting questions for the next video. So if you have anything else new you'd like to ask, please do so. Otherwise, thank you for watching and have a great day.